Devon,
Wait,
welcome to the podcast.
thank you. Thank you so much.
So, for our listeners, how about you just kick this off by giving us a little intro to you? Who are you? What do you do?
Sure. My name is Devon Trevathan. I am the co-founder, co-owner, and operator of a company called Liba Spirits. It's a nomadic distilling company. We're kind of a bit of a first of our kind in the way that we produce spirits. And formerly, I've been a bartender, a brand manager, a wine and retail specialist, worked in distilleries, and also have written for distilling publications for the last couple of years too. So I've worked about every part of this business, really focusing on the distilled spirit side, but also a lot of hospitality as well.
Well, one of the things I like on this podcast is to talk to specialists, but I myself am more of a generalist. So it's good to also take some time and chat with like-minded people who also end up wearing many hats within the industry. So we've got a lot to talk about with Liba Spirits and
Yes.
with this, kind of first of its like kind of methods approach to putting out spirits to the world. But I want to start in a non distilling vein, which is to ask you about travel
Yeah.
and if spirits and booze and visiting distilleries was just completely out of the picture. Let's imagine that you're just going on a trip to somewhere that you're excited about. What are
Yes.
some of your favorite parts of travel, whether it's the actual transit or the getting there or the exploration? Like, what are some of the feelings that make you such a travel bug?
I think that this will make sense, but I really actually love the discomfort of travel. It takes you so far out of your comfort zone immediately. You land somewhere and if it's especially the first time you've been there, you don't know the area. I mean, you can maybe look at maps, but that's different than like the intimate knowing of living in a place. You are unaware of potentially the customs. You don't necessarily speak the language. You can't quite read road signs, and nothing is familiar to you. And I do genuinely love that feeling because to me, it forces me to be so present in that moment and to be there and to really focus on all that I'm doing. It has created the strongest memories. I think probably throughout my life, my strongest memories are really related to travel. And I kind of made it a habit, not a habit, I made it a very kind of goal of mine to spend longer periods of time in places. Because I think 3 days, easy, you are still going to feel that twinge of discomfort, but you'll probably have worked out those 3 days and planned them pretty much to completion, and you'll just be doing that, executing that plan. A week gets a little bit more fluid. You have a bit more time to explore. But being in a place for like a month to 3 months to 6 months, that's a lot more time. You really have to settle in. There's going to be creeping senses of loneliness and a little bit of probably fear, and you're going to feel very disconnected from your home, and you will appreciate your home even more for that reason. And so I did that a couple times when I was young. When I was 19, I spent 6 months living in Italy. I was in college at the time. My major, which was psychology, did not offer a study abroad, so I just decided to take my courses online for a semester and go work as an au pair and live with a family in Milan, Italy, which was an amazing experience. But it was, challenging and scary. And I had to go find friends, and it wasn't so easy as my life had been. And so it was a very stark experience. There was times where I was really sad and homesick and felt like I'd made a giant mistake, even though, 6 months is not that much time. But when you're that young, it just feels like forever. But it forced me to kind of push through. And I think it made me a better person for it. So that sense of initial discomfort and kind of moving through that to find comfort, I think is a really important emotion. It's something that I definitely still chase at times.
Interesting. Yeah, I like the notion of moving through discomfort because I mean when asked you what what your favorite parts about traveling are, I wasn't expecting you to say, oh, the discomfort.
The
Um,
hard parts.
yeah.
I mean, also just like meeting different, meeting people from truly culturally different backgrounds is amazing. And I do love the food and the beverage side of travel so much. I think that that is one of the best places or one of the best ways to like touch down with a place. But the sensation that I will always remember is feeling scared and uncomfortable and like getting comfortable with that feeling. And I think it's made me more adaptable in my life here and wherever I am, basically.
mm,
It really made me. I actually was talking to somebody last night about Ubers, and they were talking about like Uber Black, which is, I guess, like a higher end Uber car, and how there are benefits to it. And they like, I don't know, they more check the drivers have kind of a more rigorous standard that they have to meet to get that. And I just realized like if you have been in other countries and taken the most sketchy taxi driven by a guy who doesn't speak a word of the same language that you speak, and you're just kind of going on a hope and a dream, the whole concept of Uber is already so, it feels so safe and it feels so almost luxurious. And so to even get to another level of luxury and have something that's even higher end, and the driver is more vetted and the inside of the car is more luxury, it just feels like I'm glad that I still feel like that is a luxury,
mm.
and it's something that I can like aspire to grow towards, because I'm not paying that crazy premium on every Uber I take. No way.
Sure. I think it's interesting to me. Some of the things that you're saying speak toward creating a wider lens, a larger map of contexts and terrains and stuff like that. And I think one of the one of the touch points for me in that sort of thinking is I have a poetry background, and what one of my teachers used to refer to that as is going up and down the register. So the top of the register is Uber Black, Uber XL. You've got Escalades and you know you know all whatever the big black SUVs are that pulling up to, and then uh, champagne service in the back or whatever. And then the
Yeah.
absolute bottom of that is, some person in a third world country who rolls up on a moped that's, smoking out the back and says, hop on. Right. So there's charms in all of that. But I think that, tying it back to the notion of travel, I think one of the things that's great about travel is that we do tend to live within fairly narrow ranges of a given register. We walk out our
Yes.
doors,
Our
things look
daily lives.
similar. Yeah, right. So, and so I think that some of the so getting out of your own register is uncomfortable, but it can
Yes.
also be delightful because you can
Yes.
start pairing and juxtaposing things that don't necessarily always make sense to everybody,
Yeah.
and that's thrilling and exciting. So why
Spectrum
don't you?
of experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you now transition us to Liba Spirits? Give us a little intro to what Liba Spirits is, and maybe we can tie that into your sense of adventure and travel.
For sure. I think so. Um, Having those kind of moments where, or experiences where I spent greater periods of time in a place and really tried to understand it better, spending that chunk of time in Italy, and then right after college I spent a year living in Taipei, Taiwan, which is amazing, and continue to take trips. I fell in love with, spending time in different places and all of its own unique elements and idiosyncrasies. And so coming back to America, I moved to Nashville and I got a job working at Corsair, kind of on a fluke. I got a job working in a restaurant, and one of the people that would kind of come into the restaurant all the time was this girl who was dating a bartender, and she and I would just chat. She was really lovely. She's still a friend to this day. The bartender did what bartenders do and cheated on her, and she was mad at him and decided to move finally across the country, and it was a great story for her. But she left a job at Corsair. She was working at Corsair. And right before she left, she asked me to apply because she just thought that I would be a good fit personality wise. And I did at the time have a little bit of experience with beverage alcohol production in the United States, only in the sense that when I was in college, I worked at a mellow mushroom actually, but the mellow mushrooms, like still probably to this day, but back in the day, that was kind of the spot if you were into craft beer.
Yeah,
So
totally.
before I was even of drinking age, I was really expected to know the differences. We had like 27 taps. I needed to know those beers to sell them. And so I got into the craft beer production, and that showed me kind of that yes, beer is one element, but within this category, there's all this differentiation and unique kind of styles of production that create these very different beverages, and people love that and they geek out on that, and it's something that I connected to. And so I thought I was interested in beer production and brewing. And then Corsair at the time was still, they had like a little 5-barrel brewing system. So she was like, well, this is a distillery, but if you're interested in brewing, you might, you know, come on board, learn about it, learn about distillation, see what happens. And then I got the job, and I just totally fell in love with distillation. I thought, man, here is a a study, a science that is everything that I'm interested naturally in. You know, it's history, it's culture, it's place, it's travel related, it's very geographically linked, it is community, it's hospitality. And I think that if I could think about two things that have run through my life and brought me to starting Liba, which is a nomadic distilling company, I think it's the interest in both travel but also hospitality. Those two things are like what I've always loved. And distilling was just such a great world to step into if those are natural interests. So I worked in that distillery for a while, and then I just kind of fell fully into the distilling industry, worked all these different gigs, and finally, at one point, I took a trip with my business partner to Australia, of all places, and kind of after, like on a whim, just meeting these Australian distillers who were cool. And they were like, come to Australia. We'll show you a good time. Come visit our distilleries. And we were like, well, okay. Yeah, you don't have to ask me twice. So we went to Australia and we got to try. It was very nascent. It still kind of is a very young distilling industry, but
It's
we
young,
got to
but it's
try.
big. Gin
It's
is
young, but
booming.
it's growing, and it is growing despite some true hardships because their
Yeah.
tax system on distilled spirits
Hmm.
is crazy, very prohibitive.
Bananas. Yeah.
Bananas, they're paying like $28 per bottle in tax, which is nuts.
Yeah.
So we went there, and it was amazing to see all these people who are really, really passionate. Obviously, to pay that much money in tax per bottle, you have to be pretty passionate about what you're doing. And they were using really beautiful and interesting flora and fauna in their distillations because everybody kind of was at that phase where they were doing gin, a lot of like lesser aged spirits, and then some whiskeys as well. I mean, Australia and kind of Tasmania, especially within Australia, is very well known for their whiskeys now, and they were back then too. And we just loved the regionality, like all of these different. I had a gin that had green ants used in the distillation. I don't think it's made anymore, but it was made at formerly Adelaide Hills Distillery, now I think 78 Degrees Distillery. They used actual green ants that they kind of harvested from the middle of Australia, the bush, and they used it in the distillation because it had a character almost like kaffir lime, like a very citrusy lime character. And then they would also include some of the ants in the bottle as well. Yes. That's it? Wait,
Yeah. Yeah.
is that in your phone?
Yeah. Yeah. I got to. I did a gin class this
Oh
past
my god, with
October.
Gary?
Yeah. Yeah. With Gary
Love Gary. He
and
was telling me about that.
yeah.
The
So
gin class. The ant class.
we got to taste the various ant gins and stuff like that. So
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. And yeah, so then I found out after going there and trying that one green ant gin that there were other ant gins, and there were people all over the world using. And so it really illustrated to us how you could take all of these categories that you know so well, and you could make something quite different just by going to a new place, which sounds obvious, but that was like a real aha moment. So that paired with just kind of a little bit of youthful hubris convinced my business partner and I to start a company when we were very young and very underfunded. And
Mm.
then a pandemic hit. And so the timing was, I mean, like not the best, not the best, but we're still here. We're still trucking. And so we started Liba Spirits, where we distill. We call it nomadic distilling. It has been called other things in the past. Gypsy distilling is probably the best known term, but gypsy is a slur. So we decided to step away from that, and we felt like nomadic was a pretty good encapsulation of what we do. We go to different places around the world. We make all of our spirits in a different location, and we literally go there. We spend time there, and we do the distillations. We just rent space on a distill on systems that belong to other people, so that we can make spirits that have kind of a sense of place and are all very influenced by the places where we made them in different ways.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's obviously very different than the model that most people think of when they think of a distillery or spirits brand. Most people don't realize that spirits can just be contract distilled and they can just materialize on liquor store and bar shelves without the people who, sell them actually having any connection to the people who make them. Um,
Yes. Yeah,
but
I kind of constantly underestimate the, and this is not a dig, but just the lack of foundational knowledge about this industry that the layperson has. It's just not really there. Not for anybody's fault, but it's just not there.
well, and so I think that sort of should prompt us to dig in a little bit more to the nuts and bolts. So, could you use maybe your first spirit as a case study to kind of walk people through step by step the process that you went through to create it so that they understand? And that includes also like getting it back to the US and selling it, because I think easy enough to
Oh yeah.
conceptualize somebody like renting time on a still, fine. But
Yeah.
like, all right, now you got it. Like, how are people getting it? Especially if like your first spirit, it didn't get made here in the U.S.
Yes, yeah. The getting it back and selling it part was inarguably the harder part of the entire process, the more time consuming part. So yeah, so our first spirit, we made 3 spirits so far. Our first spirit that we made is a gin that we distilled in the Austrian Alps at a distillery that has been, it's an orchard distillery property. It's in the Alps in southern Austria. It has been in the same family since 1643. So for that reason we call our gin 1643 Alpine gin. And the property distillery is called Kuhn's. It is family owned, family run, and we just kind of had a connection to the people there. And they very kindly allowed us to come and use their stills and enter into their space, which I think is so exceptionally kind. I'm very grateful for everybody who allows us to do that. So we knew that obviously there's all these big considerations when you're starting to get into distilled spirits. One of the biggest ones is, what is the first spirit that you're going to release? Are you going to make something that likely has to be unaged or has very little age? Or are you going to acquire something that somebody else made that has age, but is more kind of the direction you want to go in, and you're just going to use something that's sourced until you have your own stock to sell? We, knowing going into this process, we always wanted to make the spirits ourselves. And when I say me, it's just me and my business partner, Colton Weinstein. I can't believe it's taken me this long to mention him. I'm a terrible business partner, but he's my business partner, co-founder, co-owner. It's me and him. So Colt and I knew always that we wanted to distill, because that's kind of, we didn't have a lot going for us when we started. One of the only things we really had was our experience. So we could trade on that, on the fact that we can actually distill ourselves. So gin was already kind of in the running. And of course, we'd had this experience in Australia where we tasted all these amazing gins, and it did change the way that I thought about gin. I didn't even have a bad feeling about gin. I didn't have, as opposed to a lot of people, I've always liked gin. I've always appreciated it. But it really showed me that gin is one of those spirits where you can see it all across the entire world and all of its many variations. So we knew kind of going in that we'd be making a gin. And obviously we were not aging it, so that was helpful as well. So we went there, and I hesitate. Obviously, the first kind of, or one of the first few questions we get is about the whole concept of terroir. I hesitate to use that word. It's a loaded word. It is a wine term. And it kind of has, I mean, it does have a definition. At times, I think people expect something very specific. If you say that you were making something with terroir that I wasn't sure we were always going to be delivering on. So I don't really use terroir as much. I use sense of place more. I want to like connect it to place, sense of that place, you know. So when we were making this gin, we knew we wanted it to have a sense of this place. And we were in this really beautiful location. You know, the Alps are obviously a huge mountain range, but between the peaks there are valleys that are really verdant and have great agriculture. I kind of feel like it's alpine, but we ended up getting um, these fresh Italian lemons and oranges from Verona, Italy. And we also got a fresh Italian juniper to use. And all of that is very impactful in the gin that we made, very much present. Um, and so I almost sometimes feel like, and we use some fresh rosemary from Austria and a fresh Austrian ginger and all of the rest of the kind of spices that we got and dried botanicals were all from a local supplier to the area that we were. So between that Austrian influence and the Italian influence, I almost sometimes kind of refer to this as a Tyrolean gin because the Tyrol is this region in southern Austria, northern Italy. It stretches, I think, across a couple other countries in Europe. And it's a beautiful agricultural region. It really is indicative of its place. Not a lot of people in America think about it or know about it necessarily, but I would say that that's kind of the influence of this gin. Um, and then, so the fresh Italian citrus, the fresh Italian juniper, we went and got all of this in Italy. We were like driving through these insane mountain roads, going, over the Dolomites and grabbing, filling an entire van full of citrus. Brought it back, did the distillation. The base of our gin, our Austrian gin, is mostly an Austrian wheat based neutral, like a locally sourced neutral. But we included a portion, a not insignificant portion of spirit made from a wild apple that literally grows on the property that we were distilling on. So very, very connected to place. Very, and it was just like it was a beautiful. It's a beautiful gin. It's a beautiful spirit. All of those ingredients that we sourced were incredible quality, most gorgeous citrus I've ever handled in my entire life, and it was just really special. But we brought that back. So the process of getting it back, we left it there. We trusted the folks at the distillery to slowly proof it down for us over time because that was kind of the longest actual thing. We also had to kind of wrap up and cut back to the United States a little bit early because we had landed in Austria on February 17th, 2020. And obviously,
Ah, yeah.
yes, timing was not on our side necessarily. We got back to the United States the day before they stopped allowing flights from Europe back in.
Nice.
So it was
Nice.
crazy. It was
Wow.
chaos.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think it's interesting about the proofing down slowly too, because a lot of people don't think about that with clear spirits. A lot of distillers do resting and slow proofing, and you got a lot of oily stuff in there with the
Yes,
citrus and the fresh juniper and the rosemary and all that stuff. So it's definitely something that
lushing
bears
was a
slow
problem.
proofing. Yeah.
Yeah, when we were doing all of our test batches, the lushing, the kind of hazy particulate that becomes like this opalescent haze in your spirit, and it usually happens on account of oils, and so sometimes it's intentional. Like you can force it when you do like a pour over with absinthe because it's very oily. But we had some lushing in the bottle or in the test that we were doing of the gin, and we were like, it's not going to work. So we had to be very, very careful about time and temperature as we were proofing down the gin to make sure that no particulate was forced out of suspension.
Yeah.
So we, yeah, there was considerations, and I mean, thankfully that is a big part of this whole process and our business is that it is not a collaboration. We don't expect anything from the people who own the distilleries that we're working out of. We don't expect them to put any money up. They don't need to market it. They can talk about it as much or as little as they want. It's really just a passive bit of income. But if they want to be part of the conversation, if they, we're making this stuff, we're going to be throwing samples their way the whole process, because the more noses on whatever we're making, the better. I want as much feedback as I can. So we do encourage that part of like a kind of element of camaraderie, very open discussion. And for that reason and for other reasons, we kind of have it as a rule that we only approach distilleries that are run by people who make spirits that if we don't like them, we at least respect them, because we want to be, working with and surrounded by people who we feel like are actively part of this business. They know what they're doing to some degree. And also, if there's something that we need, like we need them to slow proof down a gin for us while we run back to America before it turns us away because of a global pandemic, we want to know that they can do that. And so it's part of our whole ethos with the business is to try to work with people that we like and respect.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we'll definitely get to your other products, but I
Yes.
think this is a nice time to pause and speak a little bit more about that concept that you mentioned, terroir,
Yes.
because you go to Austria to make your first product. Well, okay, you're in Europe. Europe is sort of the birthplace of terroir as we think about it. And
I would
every
say so.
country, Austria, Italy, France, Germany, we all have our own geographical indications and protected denominations of origin that stipulate things not only about process and sourcing, but also about geography. And so Europe does seem to me to be this place where invisible lines were born, where when you're on this side, you're in, some backwards ass grape vineyard, and you step over the line and suddenly you're in Champagne, like
Yes, exactly.
you're Blanc de
There's a
Blanc, Blanc de
wall.
Noir, and great,
Yeah.
right? And it's a matter of 3 feet.
It is
So
shocking how small those spaces really are when
yeah,
you
yeah,
when you get there. You're like, "Oh wow, it's just right
yeah,
here."
yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, a risk of what you're doing would seem to be, and maybe this is just me throwing a straw man risk at you, but like,
Throw it, do it.
I mean, like, there's a little bit of potentially cultural appropriation going on here. I mean, you just waltz into Austria and decide you're going to make like a Tyrolean gin and bring it back to the US. Well, la di da, right? So, like,
Well, yeah.
what do you
I
say
mean,
to
first,
that?
I don't think I've ever waltzed. I'm not that elegant a person. But yes, absolutely. There is a risk, and that is a very, very reasonable, logical question to throw our way. It's a big consideration. And I think over time, I've been asked this and I've thought about it a lot. Um, what we've done from the beginning and what we will always continue to do is to you not to like just perfectly rip off an existing spirit. We tend to go places and really try to learn about the history, the distillation, the practices, the traditions. But then we want to apply our own lens. We want to filter it through our own lens so that it feels very much still like something that we have made and not something that we took so much from this place. We didn't go there. We didn't like find something and just take it. I really feel like all of the spirits we make, we went there, we created something and we brought it back, or we, brought some of it back. And that's really important to me. And I think that's kind of the process or the part of the process that I'm most proud of. And I will most often try to highlight when people ask this very reasonable question is that it doesn't feel like we're just taking it and not showing any appreciation, because we're really open about what we're doing and we are very appreciative of, I mean, this all comes from a love of distillation at its finest. It's at its best. Distillation is representative of the ingredients used to make that spirit. A lot of people don't necessarily respect the ingredients in their process. And also, to that end, we don't use any type of flavor. no artificial, no natural flavors. Everything is real whole ingredients. And I think that's important as well, is that everything is a illustration of the place that it came from. So am I convinced that we're doing it perfectly and that we are totally, just skating by any accusations of any kind of cultural? I mean, I think cultural appropriation probably we're pretty clear because they're different spirits. But I think it's really good to think about. We're at least at the very base, we are using an industry or a local industry built up by others, and we are capitalizing on that. But I hope that in exchange, we are bringing much needed attention to that place and making people aware of it.
When you travel, and this could be distillery related or not, do you ever get into situations where you notice something or you're amazed by something, and or you're captivated by some small detail or some aspect of everyday life that seems like really mundane to the people, where they're like, oh, that's interesting to you? That's just noise to us, that like we don't even see that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, for sure. The gin production and living in Austria, that was just like next level. Their lifestyle, the way that they live their lives is incredible because they eat amazing food, like made by hand, homemade food every single day. And the whole entire distillery, which is a family run distillery, but there's quite a few people who work there. Every single person breaks and eats lunch together at a big table every single day. Every single day, all together. Nobody's at their desks. Everybody is at the table. Nobody has phones. Nobody has computers. They spend time. They spend that time at least together every single day, and they eat amazing food. And then 2 hours later, they break again and they have coffee and they have some kind of gorgeous, rich, decadent dessert every single day. And of course, they are also very trim and all. They seem very healthy and
Yeah.
totally burn it off, but they have very late dinners too. But yeah, just seeing that was, I don't know, I loved that. That was beautiful. That was like such connection and such appreciation for good food and conversation daily, which is really nice.
So to me, this is important, and that's why maybe I identified the appropriation question as a bit of a straw man, because to me it's a straw man. I think, listen, I'm half Polish. Come and appropriate this shit out of that cuisine. Like, please,
Yeah.
somebody come and fix it. Like, I'm not going to say anything. Please appropriate my cuisine and make it a little bit better. The other half's not much better. It's French Canadian, so there's a little bit of French influence in there, but there's a lot of
A lot of
potatoes.
Canadian.
A lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
potatoes and pork. Come on,
Uh,
somebody,
Poutine.
welcome into my cultures. Take it,
Yeah.
appropriate it, please.
Take it.
I'd like to see what you
Refine
do.
it.
So that's my stance on, like, I guess specifically food and drink, quote unquote, appropriation. But more importantly, I think the role of the visitor or the outsider, which is, you referenced earlier, hospitality. Hospitality
Yes.
involves
Hospitality.
outsiders. Like, taking outsiders onto the inside is literally the whole script of hospitality. But I think that's important to the definitions process, because, going back to these protected geographic indications, production style, denominations of origin, I think it's very easy to start looking at those as bullet points or as rules and sub rules just on a written page and as boundaries drawn on an abstract political map, when really they're spaces that you can enter and landscapes that you can observe and interact with. And to me, I don't know, that observer and translator and ambassador aspect of what you're doing is way more interesting to me than, maybe not than the places, but it's interesting to me in that it seems like the role of Liba Spirits is that of translation, and as being almost like the lens through which we view these.
Very much so. I hope that that is what we're doing and doing in a very successful and respectful way. I think that the further we've gotten into this business and just the further I've gotten into actually producing spirits, the less interested I am in really adhering to very strict categorical designations. There are a lot of people who are doing that very successfully. There are a lot of really great examples of anything that you can imagine now. Um, and I don't necessarily find that kind of the most exciting places to play in for production anymore. I'm not maybe at some point when we were first starting this business, I thought, oh, how cool to like go to France and make a true Armagnac and just have it be so reflective of that place and really do it in the traditional sense. And I still think that's a beautiful spirit. And I still hope that people are somehow finding that Armagnac exists and seeking it out in America. But now I feel like, oh, let me go and maybe make something sort of in that style, but change something about it. And, it'll be hopefully, yeah, people see that it is a translated experience. It involves us as much as it involves the place itself.
Hmm.
And I think that that is kind of our whole ethos is place, but with a heavy influence of our taste, what we're experiencing there. Because I want it to feel kind of like a travel journal or a travel diary in liquid form. Like it is influenced by our perspective as much as it is the places that we're going. And I really want the places that we're going and where we are to shine through. But I want people to know that this isn't just all you'll find there. There's so much more to still discover. Maybe this is a way in, but then you've landed in this place and now you can look around. There's so much more to explore.
Yeah. It's very travelogue-y. If you haven't read Matsuo Basho's Narrow Road to the Interior, I think that would be an interesting thing for you to check out, especially
I
considering
haven't.
that the specific style that it's written in is very like what you do, which is go to a place and then you write a haiku. Go to a place, make a
Yes.
spirit. So check that out if you haven't already. But
I need
why
to.
don't you tell us now about botanical gin? Botanical rum
Yes.
and bourbon-based aperitivi.
Yes. So we talked about the gin, kind of wrapping that up when I brought it back to the United States and started to sell it. There was so much story there. We'd really taken, a lot of effort to make something that was so connected. And we had all of these touch points that drove it into the ground in these different places in Austria and Italy. And I came back to the United States and I started to sell it and I started to take it around. And it was so hard to get all the way through that story. It's really hard to get people there was so much there. Not only are we distillers, we're making a spirit, but we're making a spirit nomadically. And what is that? And we have to, so there was a lot of education, and that's not a bad thing. But we thought, okay, so when we're going to make our second spirit. We know we're making a spirit in New Orleans, a city that is truly unlike anywhere else in the United States or in the world. We're going to make a rum naturally because Louisiana has sugarcane. It's one of the few states in the United States that does. Um, but how do we continue, exploring this whole sense of place element in this next spirit? So, with the botanical rum, Lafcadio or botanical rum, we decided, so we made a rum base, distilled a rum base ourselves in New Orleans that is from Louisiana. It's a molasses made from Louisiana sugarcane juice. Molasses is a byproduct of the sugar refining process. Um, we did kind of considering that New Orleans is very French influenced country or city. We thought about looking for fresh sugarcane juice to distill, since that is like the hallmark of agricultural style agricole rums. But if you want to see a very kind of good old boy industry, look at the sugar industry in Louisiana. It was just like a woman and a Jewish man from New York trying to call all of these these plantations, these sugar fields and get fresh pressed sugarcane juice. It's very hard. It was really, really hard to get anywhere. But then we found this molasses, and we really loved the character, and we knew we could do something amazing with that. So we went with the molasses, but we wanted to make this a spirit truly connected to New Orleans, not just Louisiana, because New Orleans is a very special place. So we were looking at started looking at all these elements of New Orleans that are iconic, identifiable, and naturally food, their cuisine came up, and we started looking over all of these different classic recipes, and we found bay leaf is in everything, and peppercorn is in everything, foundational to their flavors, bay leaf and peppercorn. So we decided to infuse bay leaf and peppercorn into the rum with some other elements to kind of balance that out and find harmony, but also keep the base rum very flavorful, which would be part of botanical rum as a category, a subcategory, which was growing at the time, kind of still is. And I'd had some botanical rums already that were really neutral. The rum part was, and we didn't want to do that. We still wanted a lot of rum. So we just kind of took this rum that we distilled and built extra flavor on it to make it into this botanical rum, really inspired by and steeped in New Orleans. And I feel like if you taste it, it speaks to New Orleans in a lot of very kind of uh, subtle, but some very over the top of the head type of like hit you over the top of the head type of ways. It is a super aromatic spirit, like jumps out of the glass at you. And New Orleans, famously, you can walk around with cocktails. I wanted a spirit that you could walk around. That city is smelly if you've been there in the summer, especially. Like it is a dirty, delicious but dirty city,
Is there
and
an
it
event every
smells.
summer that draws a lot of people down there for booze?
The people in the summertime and the trash, coupled with the
Yeah.
trash on the streets and the piss that's left there by so many drunken tourists, just creates a very heady aroma
Oh yeah.
that is very New Orleans.
Yeah, you can like
And to
see it.
match that, yes, to
Yeah.
match that takes some serious aromatics. And I feel like our rum does that, which I am very proud of. But it was a different kind of, I think, a very different way of interpreting place into that spirit versus the gin that we'd made, because it wasn't necessarily all about everything coming from New Orleans, but really there being a flavor that is very tied to New Orleans.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, even there's even a little bit of what I think is kind of a smart genre bending impulse in the way that you set it up too, because you didn't just make a botanical rum that was like a cane based gin, and you didn't make a heavy sweetened, sticky Christmas spiced rum. You
Yeah.
kind of went to the middle in a place where there
Yes.
wasn't a lot else doing that. So
We kind of, yeah,
yeah, I like that.
went right through the eye on that one. It was, I mean, like I love that spirit. It's so polarizing. That is a spirit for sure out of our three that, I mean, all of our spirits are kind of polarizing, but that spirit is so polarizing. Some people fucking love it. Sorry if I'm not allowed to curse. Some people love it, and some people hate it, and they tell me right to my face. But I love that it's so strong in flavor, and I love that it comes through so hard in cocktails because New Orleans is a cocktail town, and I think it brings something to the cocktails. It brings something new, and it's kind of, it's very savory rum. It's dry finish, and I like that flavor. I like exploring that kind of flavor in spirits. I think that there's a real future for it that we're seeing already kind of teased out now, but I'm sure there's going to be more and more of that going forward. So yeah, I loved that kind of interpretation of place with that spirit. So gin, kind of very classically place driven. The rum, we were switching things up. And then our third spirit, a bourbon based aperitivo that we make here in Nashville, where I live, is very much kind of the final. It feels like a very evolved product out of considering that whole concept and turning over in our minds what it means to be a place driven spirit, but it also, and very intentionally. So it was something that we wanted to make that was going to be new, that people hadn't experienced before, and really ever. I mean, I haven't done all the research in the world, but I've never found a bourbon-based aperitivo to have existed, and it kind of feels like, I mean, not an obvious choice, but it wasn't too terribly complex of a way to innovate a category. And it really speaks to me, aperitivo really speaks to place in spirits and cocktails. That is like a place driven category and concept, because it's not just the spirit itself, it's the culture around it.
So you've got these three products, and we'll get into the Terroir a little bit more in depth. But I mean, are you bringing them all to like a central warehouse location and selling them online? How are you managing inventory? Like, what is the day-to-day side of this, and the hopefully Devon makes some money side of this thing look like?
Still really hoping for that. There is, so first off, we actually don't have a DSP as Liba Spirits. We don't have a distilling
Okay.
license, though the more formal kind of one. We technically are importers. That's the license that we have. So a lot of this is kind of like old school handshake deals type of thing, because we are going into other people's distilleries, not as licensed distillers necessarily, quote unquote. It's not like very nefarious or anything, but our official designation as a company is that we import. So once we've gone there, we've actually done the distillation. We kind of package it together with the distillery that we're working out of as like a contract price. So we pay them like one flat price that includes like the raw materials, the time, and then our, wrapped up is our time spent using their system. And then we purchase that bulk at a contract kind of price. And our first two spirits, we brought the gin back from Austria. We worked with a company that basically handled the logistics, and it was expensive, but it was worth it. I did not want to worry about and figuring out shipping gin across, like trucking it across 6 countries and then shipping it over the ocean. So we just worked with somebody. It arrived more or less on time. Again, this was post pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic. So shipping was across the board kind of complex and nightmarish. So it was not just us, but it got there. And then we brought that to the distillery where we were making the rum in New Orleans. And we bottled both of those. And the same company that handled our logistics also allowed us to basically start selling, kind of self distributing in 4 states: New York, California, Florida, and New Jersey. So we were like, great, we'll do it.
Yep, those are good
We'll
ones.
start.
Yeah.
Yeah, big ones, good ones. Self distribution is not a fun process. It's very hard. It's a lot of work. It is. I mean, distributors are not always just a walk in the park themselves either, but it's a really important relationship. And I will always suggest to people who are interested in entering into this business that you should have it kind of in your mind's eye to get those distributors. But this is a great way to enter into things. And again, into these markets. This was, we finally got, things kind of got stalled because of the pandemic. But we finally started selling in 2022, at the beginning of 2022. And I was up in New York State at the time, in the Finger Lakes. And so I could get started selling there right away. And that's what I did. And I just kind of targeted bigger cities around the Finger Lakes, and we'd already made and bottled the gin and the rum at the distillery in New Orleans. Made the gin in Austria, made the rum in New Orleans, brought the gin over, bottled them both there in the middle of summer in a distillery that had no temperature control. And that was, as you can expect, quite sweaty. And so yeah, we just got started. So we kind of kept a portion there at the distillery. They kindly allowed us to store some of our spirits there. And then we shipped a good chunk up to New York and a bit out to California because we did a little bit of sales work out there. And that's kind of where our initial stock has been split. But once it came time to make our third spirit is kind of, I mean, we really like, I think quite, we really took time and took advantage of some things that were working in our favor. One being that at that time, by that time, we started making this third spirit at the beginning of 2023. My business partner was also full time managing a contract distillery that belongs to somebody else here in Nashville. So we had access to that facility, and he had been making some high rye bourbon from that was part of the contracts that they were doing, and so he was laying down bourbon of all different types. And so we decided to use some of that. It was about like a year and some change old as the base for the Aperitivo. And it still fit in with our whole concept of using spirits that or distilling our own spirits, um, and had a little bit of age on it, which was great because we didn't
Yeah.
anticipate that happening. So what we've made there, here in Nashville, we've made at the Corsair facilities, and we store everything here or send it up to New York. And now we also have distributors here in Tennessee and in Minnesota and Wisconsin. And so we send it out to all those states as well.
Nice. Yeah,
It's a lot.
it's very complicated.
It is
Um,
complicated. It's
I
not my
it,
favorite thing.
it's I wanted people to hear that because I think what do we want to focus on? The sexy stuff, the flavors, the innovation, the
Yes.
culture.
The
But
travel.
it is sometimes it's ugly getting stuff done,
Big
getting
time.
cases moved. As my friend Henry says, we get cases in, we got to get them out the door, and that is
Yeah,
not
no, shipping
glamorous.
is a unfun process to navigate. It is not great working. You know, everybody's under dealing with a lot of stuff. It's hard to work with those shipping companies. And I don't know what it is inside me exactly, but saying that I'm a distiller who travels around the world to distill spirits is such a fantastical title or description of a job. Everybody's like, "Whoa, your job must be amazing." And it is, and I love it so much, but it is also just a lot of just day to day running a company, which is unsexy most of the time.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, give us a little bit of flavor work on the bourbon aperitivo. How have you found that it works in cocktails? What are some of the flavors and some of the botanicals and the the aperitivo moves that you've done with that, and how should people use it if they can get a bottle?
Yeah. So Terroir, our third spirit, our bourbon based aperitivo, is pretty. It's a deviation for aperitivo, depending on what people expect. For it to have that bourbon character, which is not always necessarily so obvious when it's in its just undiluted form, but once you start playing around with it in cocktails, it opens up and you really get that bourbon kind of depth. Um, it's a little bit higher proof. It's 35%. Most are like 24 to 28%. But that was important for us to have some of that identifiable bourbon character because we talk about it as a bourbon based aperitivo. And then we made it in America. You know, there's more and more aperitivos being made in the United States. By far not a completely new concept, but there are people who had already done really great, faithful interpretations of classic Italian aperitivo, and they'd done a great job. Some of the distilleries in New York City, some distilleries in the Midwest, people were releasing things that tasted, I think, very comparable to, if not better than, some of our classic Italian favorites like Campari and Aperol. So we were not feeling necessarily like we had to just create the Italian classic. We wanted it to really feel like an American made aperitivo. Because the concept of aperitivo, right, is just infused and sweetened spirit with kind of herbs and barks and all of these fruits and things that grow in the ground. And that can be quite universal, I think. And I believe historically it grows out of medicinal spirit and infusions and herbs and everything. So that was practiced all over the world. So I think Aperitivo is also inherently kind of a global concept. And I felt like a true American Aperitivo quite hadn't broken through. And it also just felt like all this Aperitivos out here, they're great. Most people who are doing them, the vast, vast majority, are not distilling the base. They're using just a neutral base, which makes sense. There's stability in that, consistency. You likely won't see a lot of change of the flavors that you've created through infusion because it's kind of a blank canvas that you're working on. But we can distill, and I thought the concept of using a flavorful base just seemed so interesting to me and so obvious, and I really wanted to explore that. And then that's a fun way that I can make spirits of all kinds of categories, and then just use that and build on those flavors. So when we started to consider the flavors that we are going to use in Terrativo, the first Terrativo, we decided to really look at flavors that are historically paired with bourbon because that's the base. So looking at all these classic bourbon recipes and, trying, just doing our own samples and research and development, we really found like cherry and orange was an obvious choice because that's in, every bourbon cocktail from here till the end of time. It will be. And then having some of that depth from spice. So it's a high rye bourbon. There's always already some spice character in the base. And we decided to build on that with allspice and with cardamom. And then we wanted that kind of bitter, rich, bark, earthy kind of character, but not too much. We didn't want to make it too bitter because we wanted to have all of these other flavors stand out and be appreciable, but we also didn't want to make it too sweet. So we used a combination of different barks, not cherry bark, gentian, cinchona bark, lovage root, and we use fresh rhubarb and also rhubarb root. And finding that balance of that kind of earthy, bitter flavor was amazing. I loved that process. It took a lot of time just working out and finding what would work best. And then we really wanted to have some kind of, because we weren't going too bitter, we could also find something, an element like a tart high note element, and we were able to do that, and I'm really proud of that character actually. Just the infusion of a tart cherry and using hibiscus, and that
Hmm.
is actually also
Mm-hmm.
the source of the color of the aperitivo. It's red, obviously, or it is red, and that all comes from the tart cherry and the hibiscus.
Nice.
So you asked about cocktails as well. Okay. Cocktail wise, I mean, it works well, I think, in your classic red aperitivo cocktails. I think it crushes in a Negroni, but like a mezcal Negroni. And then I also think it's great in something as simple as like an Americano, which I know isn't really here quite in the way that I used to drink them in Italy and all the time, and it hasn't quite made its way over here. Which basically it's just red aperitivo, sweet vermouth, and club soda or soda water over a bunch of ice, but it's such a delicious cocktail. And it's really like vibrant and bright and low ABV and very drinkable. And then in a spritz with some kind of prosecco or something, it's also delicious. And I love it mixed up in more complicated cocktails. I think it still comes through and adds something really good and delicious, and it's not quite as bitter. So I think actually that's a benefit in some ways. You can use it a little bit more liberally in all different drinks and concoctions.
Have you found its perfect vermouth pairing that would be available on like liquor store shelves fairly nationwide? That somebody, if they're like, "Ooh, I'm going to pick up a bottle of this. I want to try the Americano." What would you
Yes.
recommend for the vermouth?
Honestly, I would say sweet vermouth wise, like just the dull and sweet vermouth still does its thing. It is exactly what you need.
Yep.
I love, gosh, I'm gonna forget exactly which one it is. The Lustau, I can't remember if it's the dry or the blanc. I think it might be the blanc
Mm-hmm.
vermouth, is really good. love that with Aperitivo because it's a bit more of that kind of bright vermouth character, and it's a bit fruity and it's really a lovely vermouth. It's really well made. That is a great pair for any of your cocktails. I think like bringing in a dry or a blanc vermouth where a sweet vermouth is usually called for changes things in the best way sometimes. I really love that kind of variation on cocktails. My favorite drink to drink it in right now is a drink that I'm kind of calling, I'm still deciding exactly what the name is going to be. Either it's going to be an Americano because it's just a classic Americano cocktail, but you do 1 to 1 to 1 Aperitivo, sweet vermouth, and then cold brew concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
So there's coffee, or I usually just call it a coffee Americano, but sometimes people get confused because there's the Americano coffee. So
Yeah,
I have to work it
cafe
out.
Americano.
Cafe Americano, Americano
No, that's
cafe.
still probably the coffee drink. I don't know.
I
I'm
know.
not the person to ask on that.
I know.
That
The
sounds
perfect name is out there.
that sounds like perfect for a creative session after a boozy lunch.
It is such a good cocktail for that like 4 to 7 p.m. drinking period
Hmm.
of time, which is typically that's, I'm not staying out too late anymore because I have to wake up kind of early and my dog will wake me up really early. So that's my time where I usually imbibe. And this is just the perfect cocktail. It's so good. And I love an espresso martini, but I don't always want that like richness, and I want it to be over ice and stay cold. And so this just still hits that coffee cocktail button that we all have now, thanks to the espresso martini. But it's really, really like crisp and dry and refreshing the whole time.
Yeah. Well, those are good vermouth call outs, good cocktail call outs. Man, very, very exciting. And thank you for sharing the whole journey from A to B to C. And now the question becomes, what is point D and beyond? What, now that we've got distribution up and running in a few states, now that we've got a
Distribution.
portfolio of spirits,
Yes.
now that we know a guy who's in contract manufacturing,
I know.
how are we going to continue to move forward here, either personally for yourself and your own travel addiction, and or
Yes.
for Liba Spirits and its need to take over the world?
Yeah. I mean, take over the world. That would be fun. Just see the world would be really fun. Um, I so because we started Terrativo with this bourbon based version, we kind of always had in the back of our minds the concept of doing this same thing in other places. So there will be more Terrativos coming out, and it'll follow the same kind of formula. A base spirit that we make ourselves that is kind of an identifiable of a place type of base spirit, and then building an aperitivo around it. It's not necessarily always going to be a bitter red. It's probably not going to be a bitter red. It might go in different directions. But then also we've had the chance. I would like to focus more on potentially export to other places, mostly because I do want to go on more trips out of the country. I haven't been out of the country since we made the gin, and now that's been like 4 years. So it's I'm feeling it. I'm feeling the bug. And we are also working now, doing some consulting and kind of partnership with other people, which is a really fun and unexpected development. We've been working Liba now for 2 years really consistently, and during that time, it's just me and one business partner, and we pretty much work unilaterally, and we have not always lived in the same place. So getting to incorporate more of like a partnership collaborative thing with other people is so exciting. So we've got some stuff in the works. It's a little too early to get into specifics, but some really fun stuff kind of coming down the pipeline for us. And then yeah, just expanding into new places, getting the opportunity to go to new cities and states and countries, and kind of attempt to push Terrativo and Liba out is always my goal and my hope.
Yeah, amazing. Well,
Yeah.
um, maybe we can grab a bottle, get you featured on one of our new and noteworthy segments, and
Oh,
yeah, so
yes.
we'll talk offline about that. But do you have time for a few quick lightning round questions?
Yes, absolutely.
All right. First one, um, desert island scenario. You are stranded without prospect of rescue. You can interpret the rules of this however you want,
Okay.
but you get to pick one bottle of straight spirits and then one cocktail that you can either have, in the Gilligan's Island style draft, or that you have all the ingredients to make yourself. So, what's your bottle? What's your cocktail?
Jesus. Okay. My bottle of straight spirit that I would love to have, because I love this spirit so much, would be probably, weirdly, um, what's coming to my mind is this bourbon, which is so funny because I'm not really necessarily a bourbon drinker, but it's called Low Gap bourbon.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know it. It is very, very small batch. It's made on like alembic style stills. And it was just the most incredible fermentation of a majority corn base I'd ever tasted. And it was aged as well, obviously, and it just had these crazy flavors of like coconut and tropical fruit mixed with your kind of classic butterscotch vanilla and stuff bourbon character, and that was just so good that I would probably drink something like that. Oh, maybe that, or Connemara, which is a peated Irish whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
um, and
Yeah.
then cocktail wise, I would probably do I would probably do a spritz, honestly. It's good. It's just good. It's tasty. It's bubbly. I love sparkling wine. And you can drink it pretty much at any time, day or night, and it still holds up. So, a really good spritz would be so good on a desert island in the shade, I think, probably.
True. True. All right. Next question. What are a couple of destinations? So, this could be a country, it could be a city, it could be a region that spans
Mm.
several countries, like the Tyrolean gin that we
Mm-hmm.
mentioned earlier. But what
Callback.
are a couple of places that are at the top of your travel list? Mine personally is I want to get to
Yeah.
Peru so bad. I don't really care
Yes.
where. I just want to go and just leave vineyards without
Hell
pisco
yeah.
in my wake.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, I really, 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 I've never been as far south in South America. But I would love to go to like Chile and Argentina and Peru, for the food, the drink, and obviously the natural beauty and culture. It's got it all. I would love to go to, uh, hmm. Portugal is high on my list. I actually think probably because I can go there soon. I think it's doable, and I've heard really amazing stuff about the beverage scene there right now. And then I went to Australia not that long ago, but I didn't get to go to New Zealand, so I would love to go to New Zealand. And when I was living in Asia, I never got to go to Vietnam, so I would really love to go back
Oh, oh yeah.
and to hit some of the best places in Vietnam. And then while I'm there, go back and go to my favorite places in Asia. I'd love to go back to Taiwan for a while. Such an amazing country, and to go back to Malaysia and Thailand and South Korea. It's such an amazing place. So it's all of that plus also Iceland and Greenland, like everywhere. Everywhere is on my list.
It's everywhere. Got it. If you could have a drink with anybody in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? Where would you have this imaginary fantastical drink experience?
Ooh, I would love to go to Paris and get a drink with Eartha Kitt.
Okay.
She is just seems like such a badass and such an intriguing person. She seemed like such a badass and such an intriguing person, and she lived a wild life. And I love her music, and I feel like she would just be a fucking ball to have a drink with, and she would get you like really sloshed and take you to this cool little jazz club, and that's what I want so bad.
Awesome. Final one here. You're a distiller. I'm sure you've got an answer to this. What's an unusual or controversial view or belief that you hold in the spirits and or cocktail world?
Mm. Um, mm, Most spirits don't need to be aged past like 10 years. particularly in new oak. In new oak, I cannot see really a lot of value in the 15 plus year kind of category. I think that's crazy. That's already so much oak flavor. Um, so yeah, that's I think probably my most controversial. Some spirits are really good, completely unaged.
Hmm.
My favorite rums tend to be zero age. I love the inherent character of rum. I think way too much oak influence. Just it's too much for me. I don't like it.
Yeah. Our oak forests are already in danger. Let's get off the oak wagon and,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah. I
Give
feel you.
that new growth time to become old growth.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, Devon, what is the best way for people to share in the Liba Spirits journey? And most importantly, here, how do we get our hands on some of these bottles?
Yes. So journey wise, I mean, we should always be doing more, but I at least am active on our social medias. So the Liba Spirits Instagram especially is at Liba Liba Spirits spelled the traditional way. And then my own Instagram is at Dev Loves Bev. So DevLobesBev. Um, and then purchasing wise, we are listed on online retailers. Our Aperitivo is listed on Seal Box, which is a kind of whiskey focused, more whiskey centric retailer who services a huge swath of states in the US. And then the gin, 1643 Alpine Gin, and Lafcadio Botanical Rum. Oh, I should have said Lafcadio Hearn was the person that I would most want to have a drink with because he's the namesake of our rum, but he's on the list too. The gin and the rum are listed on the Curiata site. Curiata, no, not Q, CURIADA.com. And those have at times been out of stock, but should be in stock right now. And then also, obviously, anybody who's interested and is not having, I don't know, figuring out a way to find these spirits, don't, hesitate to message me directly or email me. I'm happy to help out.
Cool. Well, we will have all that on the show notes page, modernbarcart.com/podcast. Devon, it was super fun to learn about the ins and outs of nomadic distilling and the difference between terroir and sense of place, and just your approach to your lens into the world of spirits. And we do, in this case, mean an entire world. So thank you for your insights, your passion, and most importantly, for being a guest here on the Modern Bar Cart podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. I had a great time. Really appreciate it.